Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's December 3rd, 2023. Oh, we've got a show. We've got some FOIP results we're going to be getting to at a little bit farther down the road. But we've got some things that we need to talk about tonight. And we're going to get right into it because it's a huge week in Alberta politics. No questions asked. There's been a lot that's been going on. And there's a lot of ground to cover. So we're going to hop right into it. And we're going to hop into it with a heartwarming story about how the provincial government went ahead and did intense, thorough, in-depth consultations with First Nations and Indigenous and Métis people before they went ahead with a major policy change. Oh, no, wait. No. I got that backwards. It's actually the opposite. Story came out on a little while ago, where the Treaty 6 nations said, "Hey, Alberta, you're doing this major shakeup to the healthcare system. Not sure how we feel about that, and we're not sure because you didn't bother talking to us," which is a really big problem. Now, there's going to be people who, of course, say, "Well, you know, the healthcare on reservations, that's all federal jurisdiction," and you could make the argument that that's true. But the problem that you'd run into is the provincial government has gone out of their way to partner with First Nations in Alberta, particularly on reservations, and work in partnership with First Nations peoples to create new healthcare facilities that will be accessed by everyone in Alberta. And so the idea that it's an exclusively federal relationship is a little bit disingenuous, especially when you consider the fact that there's a lot of First Nations and Indigenous peoples who don't live on reservations. And so when we're talking about how they access healthcare, how they access the healthcare system, very often that happens off of the reservation. For example, just east of Calgary, Siksika has a health center, but that health center is fairly limited in regards to the types of services that provides. And anybody who's experiencing any sort of emergent care has to go off of the reservation. So major changes to AHS have a major impact on how First Nations, Indigenous, and Métis people as well access the healthcare system. Well, the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations has some concerns with the fact that Alberta announced that they were making major changes to the healthcare system, and they weren't looped in. I'll read from the story here. But Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations Grand Chief Desmond Bull said that even though Ottawa is responsible for healthcare, the province should have come to his group first. Obviously, this has not been honored, so for me, it's a little concerning, he said, but it doesn't mean we can't fix and move forward and reverse how we conduct the process, especially addressing mental health services within the province, which is one of the big things that's been broken away from Alberta Health Services and now put in its own independent silo, reporting directly to the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. Bull said treaty rights such as the medicine chest give them a seat at the table for consultation on health. We as an Indigenous people, especially within this province that outlines the treaties of 6, 7, and 8, realize that it's very important the process to duty consult duly based on this agreement, he said. It needs to be more thoroughly conducted, the consultation process that may impact Indigenous people. Danielle Smith loves to talk about reconciliation whenever she's doing something that's, what's the phrasing I'm looking for? Yes, good for her. If she's getting First Nations or Indigenous peoples, if she's working in partnership with them to expand the healthcare system and put it on reservations so that it's siloed away a little bit, then it's all about reconciliation. If Danielle Smith is implementing new oil and gas projects, then it's all about reconciliation. But when it comes to actual meaningful consultation on issues that are going to directly affect the quality of lives of the people of Treaty 6, 7, and 8, then It's an afterthought. And of course, the provincial government has come out and said, oh, no, we're totally going to talk with them. It's cool. But the problem is making the decisions with talking to the people first who you have a duty to consult with causes very real problems. This is one of the biggest reasons, and it's mind-blowing that Alberta, of all provinces, hasn't learned this, because this is one of the biggest reasons that pipelines got canceled, pipelines got delayed. There was a failure of duty to consult. There's a fundamental lack of awareness of the fact we are obligated to honor. And it seems like more and more Danielle Smith and other levels of government are more than happy to say, hey, you know what? We're all about the reconciliation, which sounds like a horrible fitness program from the 80s, quite frankly. We're all about the reconciliation when it's easy, when it's beneficial for us. But when it actually comes to doing the work, that's where everybody seems to check out. And if I seem a little fired up about this tonight, that's because I was watching the reporting of Brandy Morin earlier today. And if you don't follow Brandy Morin, I highly encourage you to follow Brandy Morin on the Twitter machine, because she's an amazing Indigenous reporter who covers stories in a way that you don't see anybody else really covering them. And she had some videos that she shared today of the impact of the lack of consultation, especially in BC on unceded territory. And we've talked about unceded territories many times on the show before. It's a hard thing for a lot of people to really sort of accept that there are parts of Canada that just aren't part of Canada, but it's a reality. And when we see governments and corporations behaving in the way they do on unceded territories, that's really problematic. And so when we have the premier of the province making major sweeping changes to the healthcare system and in no way fulfilling her duty to consult with First Nations, Indigenous, and Métis people, that's a failure. But failure is a bit of a theme of tonight's show, as you'll see. And we're not going to move entirely away from the whole First Indigenous Métis situation, because it's a friggin' train wreck in this province, and one need to look not much farther than the situation where we head up north. Now, there's some arguably good news that came out of the northern end of the province, where it was announced. I giggle at this because it's funny. The province announced that they were putting in a new dispatch center for East, which is to say, gave back the dispatch center that they took away from Fort McMurray, Regionality of Wood, Buffalo. Now, they made a big pack. It's cool. A Tuesday statement from the province said the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo will staff and run the new dispatch center. So they took it away. They said, you know what? We're not gonna have this dispatch center here anymore. We want everything to be consolidated in the province of Alberta. But you know what? We're gonna give it back to this municipality at a cost to move it back. This doesn't include the cost to move it away. To be clear, the cost to move it back is $2 million. Now, it's only been a couple of years since they took it away. So wild that, again, this is another example where the province says, hey, you know what, we've got this thing. Fantastic. We're not really going to do any research. We're not going to really look into it too much. We're not really going to think about the implications. We're just going to do it. And then it blows up in their face. Cough, Dinah Life, cough. Moving on from there. We got to talk about the Westlock, the situation in Westlock, because it's gotten a lot of news. It's gotten a lot of attention, but not necessarily all of the blame has been put potentially in the right place. So for anybody who's not been paying attention, a little while ago, the town of Westlock decided that they were going to put in a rainbow crosswalk. This is a good thing. But surprisingly, I still don't get it. There's a lot of people who are threatened by rainbows. I mean, the inherent violence of the rainbow. Oh, it's too much for some folks, apparently. But the town decided they were going to put in their crosswalk. And there are a couple of people that got quite upset about that. One of them, Benita Peterson. She, who you might know from such hits as Nurses Are Lying About COVID and Organizer or Wasn't Take Back Alberta. Those are just some of her top 5 singles. Benita Peterson got really upset, and there were some folks in the town. It's a small town, by the way. It's like 4,800 people. I'm spitballing there. It's not a precise number. There's there who said, "Hey, we don't believe that there should be any crosswalks. We don't believe that the municipality should take any stances on any issues other than just the municipal stuff. The flags. We should only have the provincial flag, the Canadian flag, the municipal flag. There shouldn't be any other flags. We should just have a nice sanitized version of the town that in no way acknowledges any of the groups like LGBTQ2S+ or Indigenous folks. Because under the new rules that have been put forward by a petition that was organized by this small group of people in Westlock, under the new rules, nothing would be able to be displayed except for, like I said, Canada flag, Alberta flag, and apparently Westlock has a flag. So good for them. I think that's great. But nothing would be allowed to be displayed. And where it gets tricky is it's going to a vote. But why it's important to understand why it's going to a vote gets into a whole bunch of legal crap that we're going to try to simplify a little bit. So the Coles notes over the summer, the Westlock Neutrality Team gathered signatures from more than 700 residents. Now, because they gathered those signatures, there's a thing in the Municipal Government Act that says a petition for a new bylaw that has 10% or more, and again, remember I said at the beginning, it's about 4,800 people who live in Westlock, so 700 is more than 10%. A petition for a new bylaw that has 10% or more of the municipality's population on it requires the municipal government to verify the petition, and it must pass the first of 3 readings of a bylaw. So by getting that number of 700, I don't know, bigots, maybe, hard to say for sure, but probably, getting that number of 700 people to sign this petition forced the town council to look at how or whether or not they were going to adopt the law. And they only had a couple of mechanisms. And they released a really helpful little infographic, a little update, where they talked about what those criteria are and how this petition kind of penned them in a little bit. And basically the way that it works is administration received a petition from Westlock resident on September 15th, 2023, requesting that a bylaw be passed, ensuring crosswalks and flags on public property remain neutral and adhere to the following. Crosswalks only be painted in the standard white striped pattern, continental or ladder, because those are the 2 styles of crosswalk. Hey, we all learned something tonight. Between 2 parallel lines, only the national flag of Canada, provincial flag of Alberta, or municipal raised on poles on public properties or facilities. There be no decorations on town crosswalks or displaying of flags supporting political, social, or religious movements or commercial entities on town flagpoles. No grandfathering of any existing crosswalks or flags that contravene the new bylaw will be authorized. So this is a really wide net to cast in order to get the evil rainbow. Because when you take a look at the text of this law, this would include any flags from any First Nations groups in the area, any Métis groups in the area, There's a lot going on here. And where it gets to be really important is the Municipal Government Act requires the council give first reading to the bylaw. Once first reading passed, council has the following options as required by the MGA. Option 1, council could give the bylaw 3 readings, which would make the bylaw go into effect immediately. Option 2, council could set a date for the vote of the electors to be held within 90 days of the first reading, which would be no later than Sunday, February 25th, 2024. Option 3, council could wait until the next regular meeting of council on December 11th, 2023 to set a date for the vote of electors. So this petition forces the town council of Westlock to decide either you make the thing a bylaw now or you have to have a vote. The council gave first reading to the Crosswalk Flagpole Bylaw 2023-14 and set the date for the vote of the electors on Crosswalk and Flagpole Bylaw 2023-14 for February 22nd, 2024. So there will be a vote on the Crosswalk petition, the petition to ban anything other than black and white blandness. There was a movie about that. There's going to be a petition for that. Well, there's going to be a vote for that, sorry. And a lot of people heard, Westlock's having a vote. That's some kind of bullshit. Why are they all being bigoted? But it really to highlight that the town council condemned this action. And the town council was very clear that they were choosing to go the route of the vote because they believe that there are far less bigoted people in Westlock than there are bigoted people in Westlock, I guess. And here's hoping they're right. Here's absolutely. But the people to get frustrated with are not the people in the town council who said, hey, we're going to go the only road that we can go down. We're going to cross this road, if you will, in the only way that we can to try to stop this bylaw from coming into effect. So you have to give props to the councillors from the town of Westlock. And as for the people what signed the petition, I feel like we're fairly safe to say, you shouldn't have done that. Because it is ignorant and bigoted. And it's not about neutrality. It's about fear of change. That's it. It's about fear of growth. That's it. Equality, it's been said in many places before, isn't a pie. If somebody gets more equality, that doesn't decrease the amount of equality that you had to start with. It just doesn't. And so the notion that allowing people to be who they are and to celebrate the diversity that makes up almost every community in the province of Alberta isn't a bad thing. That's an acknowledgement of who we are. So here's hoping that the town of Westlock shows up in a good way when that vote comes around. Moving on from there. And this is where things start to get a little on the spicy side, a little on the that's there's a lot going on here. We gotta kind of talk about. There is a story that very quietly covered a CSIS report, and there's a lot to unpack in this CSIS report. Because what this story was very clearly able to describe, I'll just read from the story because it's pretty wild. The intelligent assessment, so it's referring to an intelligent assessment that was done in June of 2022. A trusted contact of a People's Republic consulate in Canada arranged a sensitive meeting with a provincially elected official. And this party leadership contender, okay, so we've got a couple things going on here. First of all, we're June of 2022. The person that we're talking about who went to visit the consulate, they're an elected official. But oh wait, there's more. They're also a leadership contender in a leadership race. And there's only 2 provinces that had leadership races going on in June of 2022. UCP in Alberta and a little party in BC. That's important. And this party leadership contender was to arrive in the consulate in a separate vehicle and come in via a side entrance, the document says. The meeting was to take place at a location inside the consulate where no outsider could observe the meeting taking place. So we're already getting into some pretty Men in Black, Mission Impossible territory. Because so far what we have, just to recap, so far what we have is an elected official who's also running in a leadership race, arriving in a special vehicle to the Chinese consulate for a secret meeting inside of the consulate where it couldn't possibly be observed by anyone. That's where we're at so far. But CSIS assessed, according to the document, the PRC consulate after clandestinely meeting with CA3, or Candidate 3, this is the elected official who's also running in the leadership race, signaled their preference for CA3 to their trusted contacts. So to break that down, the meeting happens, and then coming out of the meeting, the People's Republic of China said to all of their trusted contacts in that area, which it doesn't say specifically where it was, that, hey, you guys we should both support this person, who they don't name. It's just CA3. And the candidate gained support after huddling with Chinese officials. In July of 22, trusted contacts for the People's Republic of China consulate organized a campaign rally for CA3, and the same trusted contacts have formalized their continued support for CA3 during the leadership nomination process. So let's just recap all of that so we're all on the same page. CSIS released a report where they said that they had been able to determine that an elected official, somebody who's already elected, who was also running for a leadership race, got asked to attend a super secret squirrel meeting at the Chinese consulate, agreed to do so. After that meeting, where they had to arrive through a separate entrance and a nondescript vehicle and go into a super secret squirrel room, I'm picturing something with lots of glass and headphones, but that's just my imagination. That candidate, that elected official in Canada, got the support of the People's Republic of China and all of their contacts. And then in July of 2022, that leadership candidate had a fundraiser put on for him by trusted contacts of the People's Republic of China and the consulate. Just so we're on the same page there. That's where we've gotten to so far. And oh, what's this? How did this possibly get on the screen? I'm in no way suggesting that this is any way related, but here's a tweet the screen from Jason from what's this? July 22nd of 2022. My heartfelt gratitude to the 600 plus strong UCP supporters to my fundraiser last night. Special thanks to Taves, Alberta, for getting the full house excited with your vision and action plan to sustain Alberta's prosperity. And that room looks like a room that's actually in Chinatown. I don't know how that... To be clear, we are not in any way making any sort of allegations that Travis Taves, who was an elected official and a leadership race contestant who gained the support of the Chinese community in Calgary, is in any way CA3 in the CSIS report. We are not saying that, just to be clear. I mean, neither Taves or Luan are still elected officials, so there's that. But it's a fun little story, isn't it? Moving on from there, we got to talk about some of the bumpier moments of the week. Particularly some of the bumpier moments of the week inside the legislature, because there were some things that happened. So Tanya Fir let's back up. So the Julie Hayter, who's an opposition critic for the status of women, put a motion forward on Monday of this last week, where the motion was effectively arguing that prescription women's birth control should be free. It should be covered. Period. End of sentence. Women should have access to free birth control. And it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of really good reasons for it. And you would think that should be something of a no-brainer, especially if, I don't know, you're the minister for the status of women, like Tanya Fir. But rather than arguing, hey, you know what, women should have more access to birth control, they should have access to free birth control, here's what Tanya had to say.
Each year, Alberta Health Services provides contraceptive health products to approximately 19,000 Albertans. Through these programs and services, women in Alberta already have access to a wide range of affordable and often free reproductive health options. These products and services are readily available to Alberta women, regardless of their ability to pay or where they live in the province. So, as members of this House can see, Alberta women already have broad access to a host of reproductive health options from which they can choose. Wholesale changes to these programs and services are not required to improve access. Now, Mr. Speaker, our government and our partners continue to look at ways to support Alberta women with their reproductive health needs, as we have always done. I encourage members of the Assembly to recognize that Alberta's government stands by women and women's health through existing programs, and therefore to not support Motion 503. Thank you.
So that's the Minister for the Status of Women, who's a woman, arguing, oh no, women don't need better access to free birth control. It's fine, which is a pretty stunning take. All things considered, because women don't. There are many places in the province where women don't have access to free birth control, and there are many places in the province where, for women, birth control is expensive. It's also really important to highlight that there's a lot of off-label uses for women's birth control, particularly when we're talking about things like the pill. It's used to manage a variety of other medical conditions. It's not just birth control. So there's a lot of really good reasons to do it. But there's Tanya Fir, Minister for the Status of Women, standing up and saying, oh no, it's fine. But that wasn't the only bad moment that Tanya had. And we're going to play a little bit of a longer clip. And half of it, heads up, it's in French. If you don't speak French, that's okay. I only speak a little tiny bit of French, and it's not very good. But important to realize that English and French are the two official languages of Canada. And so for somebody like MLA Marie Renaud to stand up in the legislature and ask a question in French is entirely reasonable. I'm going to play the clip, and then we're going to tell you why it's just so awesome.
For St. Albert.
J'ai vraiment du mal à croire que ce gouvernement pense que ces 5 réunions téléphoniques destinées à consulter les Albertains sur le plan de PCU pour nos pensions soient suffisantes. Le recensement de 2021 nous a appris que 383 000 personnes, c'est 9% de la population d'Alberta, sont d'origine francophone. J'espère que le Premier ministre expliquera pourquoi le PCU n'a pas consulté les francophones.
The Honourable Minister of Arts, Culture and the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I can say that we value the Francophone community in Alberta. We recognize their important contributions to our province. We engage and listen in what's important to them. There's been numerous events that I've attended to engage and consult with the Francophone community, from the ACFA meeting to an AACF roundtable to a lovely breakfast with the Canadian Parents for French Education and the 7th annual biannual Calgary Francophone Gala with the ACFA, where I received fantastic feedback from the members.
The honourable member for St. Albert.
C'est pas simplement les francophones que le gouvernement va oublier. Comme d'habitude, le PCU a oublié de consulter les Albertans handicapés. Ce fois-ci, ce sont les Albertans handicapés qui reçoivent la prestation invalidité du régime de pension de Canada. 10% du total de paiement de RPC vont vers la prestation invalidité, and that is CPPD.
Ouais.
Comme vos futures consultations sur le RPC seront-elles accessibles aux Albertans handicapés?
Oui.
The Honourable Minister of Arts, Culture, Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're working hard to enhance services in French and to ensure they meet the needs of French-speaking Albertans. This year, we responded to changing priorities and community suggestions by evaluating and updating Alberta's French policy. And in addition to my role as representing the Francophone community, the Minister of Technology and Innovation is also the Francophone community liaison, and we work together to support, engage with Alberta's Francophone community.
Hear, hear.
Now, what's fun about that, in a tragic kind of way, is I'm told there's a third question that made it even more clear. The answers were very much the same as what you heard for the first two. But what's fun about that, I'm told, because as I said, my French is not great. The question was about consulting with the Francophone community in Alberta, of which is sizable. And it's important to realize that. Like, as Anglophones, we have this sort of tendency of going like, oh, we're the only language that gets spoken in Alberta. But it's absolutely not true. There's a sizable Francophone community in Alberta. And French is, as I said earlier, one of our official languages in Canada, therefore in Alberta. And the question was, how come the consultation has been entirely Anglophone for the pension situation? It's a good question. When we think about the town halls, it's entirely in English. When we think about the website, it's entirely in English. For an issue that's going to affect all Albertans, particularly the CPP disability benefits, which doesn't affect all Albertans, but the people it affects in a big way. To not have all of that information accessible, at least in both official languages, is pretty irresponsible. And Tanya Fir's response was, I went to a party with some French people. I mean, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just a hack podcast host. But when I heard that clip, the very first thing that I did was reach out to friend of the show, Sarah Biggs, and say, hey, they're using words that I don't know. Can you help me out here? And then she did. And I don't think there's anything wrong with making sure that you understand the question before you provide an answer. But I guess when it's in question period and you've been given a scripted answer by the powers that be, you just run with the scripted answer. To quality of answers that Albertans see coming out of question period. Moving on from there, we got to talk a little bit about the leak situation. There's been a lot of confusion going on in regards to the leaks in northern Alberta. And I want to start off by saying there's a lot wrong with this. There's been a lot of confusion about the leaks in Alberta. Because when you're having a hard time keeping track of how many leaks are happening in northern Alberta associated with oil and gas development, that's a really good sign you've got a really big problem. I mean, one leak is plenty to talk about, But when there are so many different leaks that it's hard to keep track of which one's which, that's a really big issue. And that's exactly the problem that we have going on in the province of Alberta right now. So, before we get to the fun part, back in March of 2023, news broke of a release of 5.3 million liters of industrial wastewater from the site. So this is the Curl site, the Imperial Oil Curl site. 5.3 million liters of industrial wastewater from the site containing arsenic, dissolved iron, and sulfates. This overflowed from a catchment pond meant to capture escaped trailings. The amount is more than enough to fill 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Now, that's a whole lot of leaking that's going on. It's a huge amount of leaking that's going on. And there's no question that that leak had toxic stuff. We've talked about this leak before on the show as well, because a lot of First Nations folks who live in the area said, wait a sec, that's going into the water table. We're kind of not cool with that. And the officials responded by saying, oh, no, it hasn't affected the wildlife or the water at all. It hasn't leaked into anything. We're good. And then pictures were produced showing animal footprints right by the side of the leak. And it was demonstrated that the leak did leak into the water table and the water supply. So this is not up for debate. This is stuff that unquestionably has happened. But this is where it starts to get complicated, because there's 2 other leaks that have happened recently that have made a lot of headlines as well. And one of the problems that's going on is that a lot of the communication with the leaks has been, what's the term I'm looking for? Oh yes, piss poor. Because it's been demonstrated that Imperial knew about leakings from oil sands tailing seepage for years. Now, Brian Jean, being the big pro oil is, he did a tour there on November 15th, so just a couple weeks ago, where he went to the Curl site and he said, oh, these guys are just the bestest. To quote, good to tour the Curl Oil Sands project today. Their commitment to environmental protection is top notch. So, there's Brian saying, oh, these guys are so great. They had that one leak, but it's not like they had 2 other. Oh, yes, that's exactly like what happened. They had 2 other leaks. Now, when we start to talk about the 2 other leaks, it's important to note that the 2 other leaks had less to do with the toxic stuff and more to do with ponds that had water that had been cleaned but still had high levels of sediment into it. 4 times the legal limit of sediment. So for context, we're talking about approximately 140 milligrams of suspended solids per liter, more than 4 times the legal limit. Now that has it's just dirt or muddy water, as you'll hear in a second, but that muddy water has direct impact on the environment and animals around it, especially when we're talking about fish, because much like it's really hard to breathe outside when it's super, super smoky, it's even harder to breathe when you're underwater and you're trying to filter through 140 milligrams of suspended solids per liter. How did Brian Jean describe this leak of illegal water?
of Energy and Minerals.
Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to visit the Curl site last week, and I will tell you that I did see some issues that, and I did raise them with the management there, and I have raised them with the senior management. But, Mr. Speaker, this particular spill is from muddy water from the surrounding area. It's not part of the tailings pond issue. It's just muddy water, Mr. Speaker, and that muddy water is actually from rain and from snow. They might not be aware of that, but in the north it actually does snow. And, Mr. Speaker, that has been stopped, and indeed water monitoring, air monitoring continues to be done and will be continued to be done in the future.
Now, on top of all of this, Suncor also had a leak of muddy water. So there's just leaks happening everywhere. And when Brian Jean, who's the Minister of Energy, stands up and says, this particular leak, that's, again, not great, is it? Because that means that we have multiple leaks in recent history that we have to talk about. And that's not super fantastic. But where things got really spicy over the last couple of days was in regards to a tweet that Rachel Notley threw up. Now, it's worth noting, and, you know, we definitely hack on the NDP when they do dumb things. That's kind of our jam. We're kind of indiscriminate with that. But for Brian Jean to say, the opposition may not know it snows, as somebody who grew up in northern Alberta, anybody who grew up in northern Alberta knows that it snows. And I know that it snows because I grew up in northern Alberta. And I know that at least one member of the opposition knows the same thing because Rachel Notley also grew up in the same town that I grew up in. So it's, again, more question period theater from Mr. Jean. But as we'll hear, he's got a little bit of a problem with words and stuff as we go throughout the night. Rachel Notley put up a tweet, a very long one. And I'm still trying to figure out how she did it because she doesn't have Twitter Blue. So it's all very complicated. Technology's crazy. But she put up a thing where she said UCP minister claims it's safe to drink water laced with arsenic dissolved with metals and carcinogens. And they were asking for Rebecca Schultz to apologize for saying that the drinking water is safe. And then Rebecca Schultz came back and said, hey, you know what? It's fine. Alberta's chief scientist has reviewed water quality monitoring results and has issued the following statement, making it clear the drinking water is safe. The Alberta NDP are guilty of spreading misinformation. If Rachel Notley has any decency, she would apologize to Albertans. Now, we talk in the show, when we talk about orphan whales, you hear us use terms like regulatory capture. And that's the idea that in Alberta, many of the bodies that are supposed to be responsible for making sure that orphan wells are dealt with, or abandoned wells are dealt with, or that the remediation of well sites is done properly, and that those well sites aren't toxic and leaking stuff for years, which they all too often do, or that, methane is tracked appropriately. When the bodies that are supposed to do that are beholden to the oil and gas industry, then we call that regulatory capture. And I suppose at a certain point we have to say electoral capture, because let's be crystal clear, clearer than muddy water, what Rebecca Schultz is saying here. Rebecca Schultz, the Minister of the Environment, literally, the Ministry of Environment is saying, hey, you know what? The drinking water's safe. She's not addressing the toxins that were released into what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, yeah, the environment. She's not addressing the toxins that were released into the water table. She's not addressing the toxins that were released that animals that will be hunted and fished have been exposed to. She's not addressing any of that. She's saying, no, the water's fine. If this was actually a government that was interested in representing Albertans, I would think that the Minister of Environment's concern might be, the environment, and not shilling and covering for a literal toxic waste leak. But that's not what she did. She decided to turn it into a partisan thing and say, that Rachel Notley, she's spreading misinformation because, all of the things that Rachel Notley said leaked, but the water cleaning systems are working great for the people who have access to them. So it's cool. Minister of Environment. Moving on from there, we're going to talk about the carbon utilization and storage. It's the big topic this week. We're going to get to it a little bit more in a little bit, where there's a massive project that's going on. There's an oil sands project they're working on a proposed $16.5 billion carbon capture project, but there's a lot of questions that exist around it. And this is where, again, we find ourselves going, so we're kind of screwing the First Nations folks. Because a large section of the planned storage area. So the idea behind this thing is we're gonna get all the carbon dioxide and we're gonna put it in pipelines and we're gonna stick it underground. And there's these caverns, and the underground caverns will hold all the carbon dioxide, so we don't have to change our behavior at all. We can just find a new garbage dump. It'll be cool, and that way we'll meet our emissions targets by 2050, I guess. So it's good. It's fine if the carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology ever works the way that it's supposed to. We'll be laughing. We'll just dump it all in this giant cavern. Except that giant cavern is beneath the feet of a major First Nations area. A large section of the planned storage area lives beneath their feet, where they have fished, hunted, and lived for generations. So that's super cool. And it's all predicated on the idea that this carbon capture and storage is going to work in the best possible way. But there's some problems with that. And a recent report really highlighted how bad these problems actually were. A report from the International Energy Agency came out where they addressed in particular, two things that they believe are going to be particularly challenging when it comes to dealing with emissions and mitigating climate change. And the second one is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. They say it quite clearly. The second is excessive expectations and reliance on carbon capture, utilization, storage. Carbon capture, utilization, storage is an essential technology for achieving net zero emission in certain sectors and circumstances, but is not a way to retain the status quo. Now, this is important because depending on what day Danielle Smith's talking, that's exactly what she's saying. If oil and natural gas consumption were to evolve as projected under today's policy settings, this would require an inconceivable 32 billion tons of carbon captured for utilization or storage by 2050, including 23 billion tons via direct air capture to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is where it gets really prohibitive. The necessary carbon capture technologies would require 26,000 terawatt hours of electricity generation to operate in 2050, which is more than the global electricity demand in 2022. And it would require over 3.5 trillion with a T US dollars, so real money, in annual investments all the way from today through the mid-century, which is an amount equal to the entire industry's annual average revenue in recent years. So that's not great. But hey, did anybody attend any press conferences this week and make any, wildly overpromising offers about where the world could store all of that carbon that's going to be hopefully captured?
That we have a specific geology and the legal torrent system of land in place that allows us to be truly the global leader on this. 5%, well, come to Alberta. We're open for business. We can store your GHGs. We can store your CO2. Korea is looking at doing it offshore. Ontario is looking at doing it in one of the Great Lakes. Other jurisdictions are looking at opportunities. Well, the opportunity is right here. We have the capacity to store 100% of the global emissions from the world right now, humankind. That's what the experts have told me. We have a geology that is second to none in the world and one of the top 3 in the world. And given our legal process here, it gives us a competitive advantage even over the United States. So I would just say we are open for business. We can store their CO2 right here in Alberta for many, many years to come, if not forever. Thank you.
Oh, Brian. This is, of course, the same Brian Jean who early on in the UCP leadership race publicly in front of a camera espoused the idea that what conservatives really need to do is make sure that they're electing conservatives at the federal level, because that's how you appoint more Supreme Court judges who are going to align with conservative viewpoints, not the rule of law, but conservative viewpoints. And he made that comment the day after Roe versus Wade was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. So Brian sure does have a way with words. Which brings us to, we're getting closer to the main events, and then we're going to open it up to our open mic, as we always do. And that's where we're going to talk about Danielle Smith and the Sovereignty Act. We mentioned it the last show, where we talked about the fact CBC on Friday last week. They were like, hey, there's a rumor Danielle Smith's going to invoke the Sovereignty Act. It sounds like she's maybe going to do some Sovereignty Act things. And in true Danielle Smith fashion, she sure did. She had herself a press conference and everything where she talked about the ways that she was going to be invoking the Sovereignty Act. And there's some clips that we want to unpack. The first one has to do with why she's kind of invoking the Sovereignty Act.
Explain what exactly is your stance against Ottawa? Is this defying, as I think you portrayed the Sovereignty Act, defying Ottawa's regulations?
Yes. I mean, if they come through with the clean electricity regs, they will be mandating that we have to have essentially an emissions-free power grid by 2035. That means no one will build natural gas. We don't have a regulatory framework to build nuclear. No one will build nuclear. We don't have the resources to build hydro. No one will build hydro. So if we do not act, we will end up with instability in our grid. We will either not be able to grow as a province, or we will end up with brownouts and blackouts. That's the pathway that the federal government is giving us. And I've just said, no, we are not doing that. We're going to build enough baseload power so that we can continue to keep up with growth, which will be doubling the amount of power that we need, and we'll build whatever we need to. In our market, what makes sense is natural gas, abated to the best available technology available right now, which may not be in sync with the federal targets, but I want our industry to be able to make the best effort, and we'll see. I mean, if they're not prepared to take the risk that their executives are not going to be thrown in jail in 2035, then we'll have to be the generator of last resort, and we will have to build that ourselves. But this is the conversation we have to have with the industry about how do we de-risk these projects to make sure that we get, they get, businesses get, and Albertans get what they need.
Danielle Smith fighting back with the Sovereignty Act. Oh, she means it this time, folks. She's fighting back against the Ottawa. Let's take a look at what the official government release says. The resolution asks to order all entities not constitutional validity of, enforce, nor cooperate in the implementation of the energy changes that the federal government wants to make in any manner to the extent legally possible. So be a dick, but don't break the law, I guess. This order would not apply to private companies or individuals, so it's only government organizations. This resolution also asks Alberta government to work with the Alberta Electric System Operator, Alberta Utilities Commission, and others to implement various reforms to Alberta's electrical system to ensure grid affordability and reliability. In addition, and this is where we get to the really fun part. The resolution instructs the government to work with industry regulators and other groups to study the feasibility of establishing a provincial crown corporation for the purposes of bringing and maintaining more reliable and affordable electricity onto the grid in the event that private generators find it too risky to do so under the CERs. This Alberta Crown Corporation would be a provincial entity and would not recognize the CERs as constitutionally valid. So Danielle Smith, the libertarian, free market, conservative, will nationalize the power grid. And there were a lot of really interesting questions that came out of that. One of the questions that came out of it was, well, how are you going to, if the law is the law, if it's literally the law that these things have to be done, and you create a crown corporation, how are you going to say to the people who are working for the crown corporation, hey, this is a federal law, we'd just like you to break it?
How do you ensure that the provincial officials you will be directing not follow this regulation? How do you ensure that they're protected from any prosecution or any fallout? Even if you're talking about not individuals, not private companies, there are still people who work at ASO, at the AUC. How do you protect them from any of the fallout of this?
Well, we'll look and see what is happening in other jurisdictions to see what kind of architecture they put around similar types of legislation. But we do also already have a practice of having indemnities in laws for certain officials. For instance, Chief Medical Officer of Health in the Public Health Act is indemnified for many of her decisions facing any kind of sanction. So there has been examples in the past where we've been able to establish provincial law to protect provincial officials as they make their decisions.
To protect provincial officials from provincial law consequences. If the CMOH walked up to someone and put a bullet in their head, they couldn't be like, oh, but I'm the CMOH. It's not how it works. It's policy decisions that are made on the best available information during a public health emergency. That's what the CMOH is indemnified from. And this harkens back to Danielle Smith's whole thing of like, well, hey, maybe we can just deputize plane loads of tourists as ambassadors to get them past vaccine restrictions at the border. Maybe that's something that we could do, even though it's not something that a provincial official at any level can do. But it's something that Danielle Smith floated because she still doesn't seem to have any firm grasp over how immunity or indemnity works. But there's still more.
I believe in our private market and that Albertans have been well served by it. We will continue to promote private electricity generation, distribution, and retail. We will preserve the interests and value of the hundreds of billions of dollars of capital investment made by Alberta's electricity system by private generators, transmitters, and distributors, and enable continued competition and attraction of private investment into Alberta's electricity sector. However, we also know that Alberta's proposed electricity regulations, if they continue to move forward, would simply put too many Alberta homes and businesses at risk. We need to protect against that. A Crown Corporation, as a provincial entity, could be directed to disregard the proposed federal electricity regulations if need be, and focus on ensuring we have sufficient electricity from natural gas added to Alberta's grid if private generators are unable to do so due to the risks proposed by the clean electricity regulations. In addition, if the CERs threaten the ability of private generators to continue producing electricity at an existing power plant after 2035, a Crown Corporation could potentially purchase that power plant to maintain that power on the grid to keep the lights on in the province. And it could also partner with investors to de-risk and develop nuclear power and other emerging generation technologies in the province as we move towards carbon neutrality by 2050.
So that's Danielle Smith saying, you know what? I hate renewables so much. I hate the idea of renewables so much that I will nationalize, provincialize the power system in Alberta. There's an expression. Anything that you say before the word but is invalidated by the word but. Another good word for but is however. So Danielle Smith talks about how much she loves the free market and how much she loves all of these other things. However, she'll nationalize the power system if that's what she feels like she has to do. Now, there was one little segment in there that we're going to come back to because it really kind of presumably, looking at the way that Smith was reading that, she was reading on script, but there was a little bit of a Freud moment going on there. But we got a couple other clips that we want to play from it, and this one speaks to sort of the ethos, the manner with which Smith has approached the negotiations.
Are very mindful, and we've read the Constitution. We believe we know what it says, and that we are staying within our lane. We're not trying to do anything that jumps into federal jurisdiction. We're just trying to exercise the power that the founders gave us under the Constitution. So ultimately, when we end up in court, the court will understand our mind through the motion that we're putting forward in the legislature. And finally, we hope that the federal government backs down. I've told them this right from the very beginning. From the very first conversation that I had with our working group, I said, why are you doing this? Because we know it won't work here. You're just putting us in a collision course where we'll be fighting with each other for months. Why don't we just work together on a 2050 target? It's been my consistent position from the very moment that I spoke with Justin Trudeau and the ministers that are at the table with us. So I'm hoping that they now understand that we're serious, that we are going to preserve the integrity of our power grid in whatever way we need to, so that we can get back to the table and talk about the ways in which we can agree. And I think there's many, many areas on which we agree. So those are the reasons.
I love that so much. Because what Smith is saying there is, the federal government, they're just being so unreasonable. They won't negotiate at all. I delivered all of my ultimatums months ago, and they just won't do everything that I want them to do. It's like when they negotiate, they actually want to negotiate or something. And at the same time, Smith says, we'll do whatever we need to do to make sure that we have all the power that we need, up to and including putting a moratorium on renewable power development for reasons that still haven't been provided to anybody. But where it got really honest was towards the end a little bit, where the questions were asked quite clearly, what are we really doing here?
Goes back to, so basically the answer is you don't need the Sovereignty Act for any of this. What it does, though, is that it actually draws more attention to it.
Sure.
So, but that's not what the Sovereignty Act was supposed to be about.
What did you think the Sovereignty Act was supposed to be about? Of course it was.
Well, the Gordian, spicing the Gordian knot and putting Ottawa on its lane, and we're going to challenge the laws. We won't enforce laws, and that the first time you use it, you make it clear we're going to follow the law. So, I mean,
well, sorry to disappoint you, Dean, but this is what it was always about.
I'm not disappointed that we're following the law, Premier.
No, I always said.
So Danielle Smith, who campaigned, who ran her entire leadership race on the Sovereignty Act and how it was going to put up a firewall, if you will, between Alberta and the rest of Canada, and especially those Laurentian elites in Ottawa. It was going to be this big protective thing. Openly admits in the press conference, no, it was always supposed to be a performative publicity stunt. That's what the Sovereignty Act was always supposed to be. The fascinating thing about the Sovereignty Act is, depending on the day that you ask Danielle Smith, what's the point of the Sovereignty Act, you'll get entirely different answers. But every once in a while, she lets out just a little bit of truth where she says, oh no, it's totally performative. That's what it is. But where it got perhaps the most, let's go honest, is actually a little bit of a clip from earlier on. Because again, it's important to realize, for the first chunk, Danielle Smith was reading a prepared statement. It's all pre-written. Every once in a while, Danny goes off script, but she was reading a prepared statement. And somehow, when she was reading a prepared statement, and I cast my memory back to the conversation that I had with Thomas Lukasik, where he talked about his experiences with Danielle Smith in the legislature, and he said Danielle Smith is exceptionally good at he called it reading the news, where if you give her a script, she can crush it. But that begs the question, was this a Freudian slip, or was this actually the script?
Also know that Alberta's proposed electricity regulations, if they continue to move forward, would simply put too many Alberta homes and businesses at risk.
I mean, she's not wrong. The reality is, Alberta's proposed electricity regulations will put Albertans at risk. Doing things like renewable energy with as much vigor as possible. When, as we talked about last episode, there's lots of corporations that absolutely are pursuing renewable energy with an incredible amount of vigor. It's really quite remarkable that that's one of the things. Alberta will do anything for love, but we won't do that. Moving on from there. The next day, Smith had a big press conference where she talked about, we met our methane reduction targets. It's very exciting, right? We were supposed to reduce methane. We did. We did it early, except we didn't at all. There's actually a lot of evidence that says no. Emissions of a potent greenhouse gas from Alberta's energy industry are underestimated by nearly 50%, according to a new study from one of Canada's premier climate labs. The study from Carleton University's Energy and Emissions Research Lab, so, legitimate, also says oil and gas produced in the province emits significantly more methane for the energy produced than jurisdictions such as British Columbia. In methods published and praised in the scientific literature and now in use by the United Nations Environment Program, the team measured emissions at surface level from a plane and from satellite data. It's the first time so-called bottom-up methods, which depend on ground-based measurements and estimates, is used by industry, have been combined with top-down methods from above. So what the takeaway is from that chunk of the story here is the industry looks at just ground-based measurements. And what this group did is they looked at ground-based measurements, plane-based data, and satellite data. The team looked at 3,500 different oil and gas facilities and 5,600 wells. It concluded official government and industry estimates of methane emissions from Alberta's oil patch are 50% too low. So perhaps that victory lap was just a little bit premature. Which brings us to the tour. For anybody who's paying any attention to Alberta politics over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of furor over Danielle Smith and her big move to COP28, taking a delegation. How big is the delegation that she's leading? Well, let's let Danny tell us.
I'd like to just say that I'm looking forward to leading Alberta's delegation at COP28 in Dubai. We have a great opportunity to share Alberta's story with the world, and we will be doing so with pride and with conviction. We will be joined by over 100 Alberta delegates helping to promote that Alberta is ready and willing to be a world leader in innovation and emissions reduction.
Over 100 delegates Danny's leading to now. Leading might be a strong term. It might be a loose term. The exact number of delegates that went to COP28 from Alberta is really hard to pin down and largely unknown. But thanks to the work of incredible economist Andrew Leach, who went through a spreadsheet that was provided by the organizers of the attendees, we're able to get a rough idea of how many people went in official, air quotes, government capacity. And it's important to realize that when I say official, air quotes, I'm really leaning into the air quotes because there's a lot of cause for that. But he was able to put together a list of a boatload of official government employees. And there's a couple of names on this list that very quickly stuck out to a few people. One of them, the Director of Strategic Engagement for the Office of the Premier of Alberta, Catherine Carruthers, who oddly isn't listed on the Government of Alberta website directory, which is kind of strange because she's been in that role for quite some time. It was Carolyn Carruthers who, by many reports, was staffing Danielle Smith, who was making sure that Danielle was engaged with the right people in the right ways at the Calgary Stampede when Danielle posed for the infamous T-shirt picture with the bigot, allegedly. But that's not the name that really has gotten people's attention. The name that's really gotten people's attention from the office of the Premier, Mr. David Moretta. Now, you might be wondering, well, who's David Moretta? Why is that a big deal? And the answer to that question is David Moretta is Danielle Smith's husband. So he doesn't work for the office of the Premier. That would be a pretty major conflict of interest. But he's going under the office of the Premier to Dubai for reasons that it's very likely that that's being covered by the taxpayer's dime. Now, this turns into a big issue fairly quickly because while this is the government of Alberta going to tell Alberta's story, it's not a formal thing. Danielle Smith was not received. She's just going to the thing. It's like buying a ticket for Expo. That's what she's doing. And for some reason, with hotel rooms, by some reports, costing $2,500 a night, she's taking her husband and a boatload of other government employees. Now, this is a bit of a shift from the way that it was presented in the press conference, because in the press conference, Danny was like, "Oh no, it's cool, guys. It's just me and Rebecca. We're just gonna have like a girls trip down to Dubai. It's gonna be great." But when you take a look at that list of how many people are going, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of support staff. And it appears, we don't know for sure, and we won't know until all of the information is posted after the event, but it appears that the Alberta taxpayer is footing the bill for the vast majority of people who are going on that trip. Not great. It's particularly not great when you take a look at some of the reviews that have been coming in from Danielle Smith's little effort. From an ECO newsletter. Now, this is a newsletter that's published by the Climate Network, which is actually been around for a really long time. It has membership organizations from across the world. You can check out their website at www.climatenetwork.org. This is not just some dude writing this up from a laptop at a Starbucks. This is a legitimate organization. And there was an article that was published in their daily newsletter that panned Smith's presence there. Not only the motivations for her being there, but also just what she was ostensibly accomplishing by being there. So the trip isn't going super great. And even the pictures that Danielle Smith has posted to social media this far show her in rooms of tens of people, and she's doing a great job sitting in the audience so far, so that's super fun. Moving on from there. Which brings us to our main event of the evening. We're not doing stuff Danny says tonight. No, we've got bigger things to talk about. We talk about the FOIPs that we do here sometimes, and we got two of them back. They're both related to the Alberta pension plan project, potentially, possibly. The FOIPs are definitely related to it, though. Now, we filed two FOIPs, and this is where it gets particularly spicy. So the first FOIP that we requested had to do with, hey, you guys said that there was a $7.5 billion budget advertising campaign going on to support, sales pitch, consult with Albertans. How much of that have you guys actually spent? And we got some information on that. Of the $7.5 million dollars, with an M, the amount that has been spent to date, and this is as of October 25th, which is the date that we submitted the FOIP on. It's the date that we asked for the information up to. The province of Alberta has spent $3,378,471.27. But where it gets interesting in the first part of this little section here is that this is clearly defined as phase 1. So we were told that Jim Dinning was going to be doing his panel and his town halls, and there was going to be this consultation that went on with Albertans, and then Mr. Dinning would make a decision as to whether or not the province needed to go ahead with a referendum. But we have 2 phases of this advertising campaign. Phase 2 is an entirely separate section of the campaign. So it's very, very clear that they've already budgeted for phase 2. They've left money over for phase 2. Now, this is the entire spreadsheet that we received back, one of them. And as you can see, there's a lot that's been redacted. There's a lot that's been, you don't get to see that. And that's interesting for a bunch of different reasons. And we wanted to talk about some of those reasons tonight. So looking at the top of the spreadsheet, you can see there's a whole lot of the codes that things are being held back on. The fund code, for example, the amount left in the budget, even though it says for media alone, even though they gave us the total amount of the spend so far, the amount spent on creative so far, the contingency fund, because they have their postcards. And here's the great news. It's postcard drop 1, postcard drop 2. So there's going to be another round of postcards, apparently. And then there's the neighborhood mail stuff. So there's lots of stuff that's apparently still coming, but we don't get to know what that is under section 25(1)(b) of the FOIP Act. What's 25(1)(b)? They don't have to disclose if the disclosure is harmful to economic or other interests of a public body. And 25(1)(b) is financial, commercial, scientific, technical, or other information which a public body or the government of Alberta has a proprietary interest or right to use that has or is reasonably likely to have monetary value. So if the marketing campaign has monetary value, then Albertans don't get to know how much the government is spending on postcard drops, or the government is spending on the creative or the creation of the marketing campaign, because it has a monetary value. Haven't really been able to make a whole lot of sense out of that one. But the favorite one, my favorite one, I love this one so much, is 21M. Because that one shows up in a couple places as well. Has to do with the cost center. So knowing the cost center they had to blind that because of 21M. 21M as disclosure harmful to law enforcement. The head of a public body may refuse to disclose information to an applicant if the disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the security of any property or system, including a building, a vehicle, a computer system, or a communication system. Do with that what you will. But that's not all. That's just the first point. That one is interesting. We get to learn that there's going to be more postcard drops. We get to learn that they've spent a boatload of Albertans' money, but they've saved a whole bunch for phase 2. And we got to learn a little bit about FOIP codes. But that's not the really fun one. So if we're going to talk about the really fun one, that was the one that we submitted where we were asking about the report. And we had some very specific questions about the report. Now I'm talking, of course, about the LifeWorks / TELUS / Morneau Chappelle report that was commissioned by the Kenney government to examine whether or not Alberta should potentially consider setting up its own APP. This was something that came out of the big consultations that Kenney did at the very, very beginning. And they said that they were going to commission somebody to do this report, to give Albertans all the information. And so what we asked for, to be clear, what we asked for was we wanted any communication between the Treasury Department and the LifeWorks / Morneau Chappelle folks about what the report was supposed to have in it, including any revisions, any changes from the original mandate. That's what we asked for. Now, here's what we got. The first thing that we got was the RFP, or the request for proposal. And in the RFP, it clearly detailed all of the things that the report must provide answers to Albertans' questions, including but not limited to what would be the required contribution rate for an Alberta pension plan, what would be transferred from CPP in terms of assets and liabilities that presently exist and can be attributed to Alberta beneficiaries. Would an Alberta pension plan provide the same level of pension benefits as CPP, and how easily might these benefits change in the future? That's really important for a boatload of reasons. Portability between CP retirement programs in other countries and an Alberta pension plan work for those moving between provinces and or countries during their years of work or retirement. We still don't have, it's worth noting, answers to a good number of these questions. There's a bunch of other ones. I'm not gonna read them off. You want to look through them on the screen. Here's the questions that the report answered. This is from the LifeWorks report. The key questions considered in this report are: could Alberta withdraw from the CPP? If so, what is the process and the timeline? What level of pension and benefits and associated contribution rate be for an APP? What are the considerations for successful transition to an APP? How would the establishment of an APP affect other government programs? What are the setup and ongoing costs of an APP, and could be the service providers for an APP? Now, a couple of things that we want to highlight that are in the LifeWorks report. LifeWorks report does a very good job of saying, hey, so here's what the rules are for getting out of the Alberta pension plan, out of the CPP. They have to provide the same amount of benefits, have to provide same amount of, all of the things have to be the same. You can't change anything when you're withdrawing. But if you actually take the time to read the report's very clear. That can be changed down the road. Very easy to change down the road. In fact, the report makes it very, very clear that the government of the day could make any adjustments to the amounts of benefits, the amounts of the contributions, with just a swipe of the legislative pen. And any majority government can absolutely do that. So the guarantees that are being talked about aren't so much guarantees in the long term, they're guarantees in order to get out of the CPP. But the RFP is like 50 pages. We're going to post the whole thing. We're going to put a Dropbox up tomorrow because that's what we do with all of our FOIP'd information. But the RFP is like 50 pages of here's the technical things, and it's super boring and it's super dry. But where things started to get really fun was that we only got 2, documents in a request for any communication between the Treasury, and which is the department that was responsible for the report, and the folks at LifeWorks / Morneau Chappelle. We only got 2 documents. We got the RFP, and we got a PowerPoint presentation. Embrace yourselves, because this is where it starts to get wild. So the PowerPoint presentation that we received was from the kickoff meeting with Morneau Chappelle and Treasury Board and Finance, which was held on November 5th, 2020. And I love the good folks at FOIP because I love the good folks at Wow, try to say that 5 times fast. I dare anybody listening to this right now. I love the good folks at FOIP because they took the care to protect the privacy of the people in the stock photos, which is very generous of them. And they did it not just cover page, they did it throughout the whole report. Anytime there's a picture that's a stock photo, they've gone ahead and made sure that they've removed the faces of the people in the stock photos. And at first glance, we were kind of like, there's really not much going on here. Because most of it is just, here's what the goals are, here's the questions that we're going to answer. It's all pretty lame sauce. Until we got to the last slide, which has the key deliverables and touch points. And this is where things start to get real interesting really quick. Because according to the key deliveries and touch points, the kickoff meeting, November 5th, 2020. The report outline, December 1st, 2020. Meeting to review, report outline, first week of December. The draft report, so this is the first iteration of the report, due 3 months after the kickoff meeting, February 1st. And we're going to assume that 2020 is a typo here. Because what the actual PowerPoint says is that the draft report is due February 1st, 2020. It's probably supposed to be February 1st, 2021. We can back that up for a whole bunch of different reasons. The meeting to review the draft report, the first week of February. The final report due April 1st. Also in the slide, 2020, we're going to say that it's probably supposed to be 2021. And there's a lot to unpack so far right here. Because for the organization that won the RFP to write the detailed actuarial report explaining to the government of Alberta, and then by extension of that, Albertans, all of the technical details, all of the legal details, all of the number of things, for them to not be able to get the year right isn't exactly a great start, especially when it's not just, it was just in one place, it was in 2. So that's not exactly the most inspiring, confidence-building place to begin with when you're saying to somebody, hey, we need you to go through the technical details with a fine-tooth comb and provide the highest level of information possible. If you could go ahead and do that, that'd be great, please. And then they get the year wrong. But how do we know? How can we say with confidence that the date that we're talking about are accurate? How do we know when they said February 1st, the draft report, the first iteration of the report was to be provided, with the final report coming 2 months later in April 1st, 2020? Well, all we have to do is take a little trip down memory lane. So the UCP government began studying the Alberta option in earnest in June, and then Premier under Jason Kenney. Later that year, the outside consultant, that was Morneau Chappelle, was hired to study the benefits and drawbacks after winning the RFP. Now, I want to again go back to this slide here because it's so important. November to April. Let's count. November. They get a whole month for November. We'll call the 5th early. December, January, February, March. We don't need to go in April because they were going to deliver the final report in April 1st, 2020. So Morneau Chappelle, the experts that were chosen after presumably a competitive RFP process, said it will take us 5 months to provide you with a finished copy, a finished Everything's done. 5 months. We got 5 months. That's how long it's going to take for us to get this to you. And in fact, we're so good, it's only going to take us 3 months to get you the first draft. Well, this lines up with public comments from Jason Kenney in March 2021. Kenney said work on the report was almost done, and his government was just weeks away from announcing the next steps. But then, in May 18th, Jason Kenney lost the leadership review, and the report never materialized. Now, Albertans didn't hear. People were asking about it. Hey, what's the deal with the report? What's going on with the report? And everybody's like, oh, yeah, we'll get back to you. And nobody knew what the timeline was for the report to be delivered. But we have the timeline now. We know that the finished report was scheduled to be delivered on April 1st. And we know from Jason Kenney's comments in the legislature that it was scheduled to be released, delivered to the government on schedule. He said it in March. He was going to be getting it a couple weeks later. A couple weeks later is April 1st. So there's every reason to believe that the government was in receipt of the report on April 1st, 2021. At that point, presumably, LifeWorks, they changed their name by then, would have been in completion of their contract to the government of Alberta. But all of the news on the report stayed in limbo for a year and a half. There were no updates for a year and a half. In fact, it wasn't until February of 2023 that Danielle Smith's office said the report was being updated to reflect new figures on the CPP. Near the end of the calendar year 2022, the Office of the Chief Actuary of Canada tabled update asset figures for the CPP, and LifeWorks required additional time to update the report based on these new figures. When the final report is ready, it will be released to the public thereafter. And this is where the questions have to be asked really hard. Because you have to imagine what kind of government contractor signs a contract to deliver a product. And they say, we're going to deliver this product. We're going to deliver you cheese. So the government of Alberta buys 50 tons of cheese because we bought knockoff children's meds. Why wouldn't we buy cheese? The government of Alberta buys 50 tons of cheese because they're going to use it for parties. But then suddenly, the cheese, some of it went moldy because we didn't use it for a year and a half. Do you then go back to the government contractor and say, hey, government contractor, the cheese that you delivered, it was on time and it was perfect. Fantastic cheese, but we didn't use a bunch of it, and so a bunch of it went moldy, and so we'd like some new cheese, please. And the government contractor then goes ahead and does all of that extra work for free. Doesn't happen that way. And it's certainly not written into the RFP that way. But there's a bigger question to be asked. Morneau Chappelle said it would take them 5 months to complete the entire report. And it's important to realize that when we're talking about the depth and breadth of the report, only parts of it had to do with the actual numbers. Only parts of it had to do with the actual math. There were huge chunks of the report that were more about legal questions and what is the process and the procedure. Had nothing to do with any new asset figures for the CPP. Now, there were parts of the report that did require calculations based on the asset figures from the CPP. But one would also think, given that the bulk of the report had been done, if there was an update that would be required because of the asset figures, which is the justification that was provided by Danielle Smith's office, the only thing that would need to be tweaked would be the asset figures, the formulaic calculations. And one would think that an organization as expert as Morneau Chappelle / LifeWorks would have kept the spreadsheets And so really, all they should have had to do was substitute in the new numbers, and bam, there's your updated report. But somehow, Danielle Smith and the UCP want people to believe that while the original report, starting from scratch, LifeWorks said would take them 5 months, all of a sudden, now is going to take at least 7 months to do. Because again, in the statement from the UCP, near the end of the calendar year 2022, the Office of the Chief Actuary of Canada tabled updated asset figures for the CPP, and LifeWorks required additional time to update the report based on these new figures. When the final report is ready, it will be released to the public thereafter. So at the beginning of February in 2023, that's the statement that LifeWorks had already started on updating the math of the report. But when was the report actually finally released? All we have to do is look at the cover page. It was released in August of 2023. So somehow the provincial government would have us believe that the updates took longer than the original authorship of the report. And somehow the FOIP office would have us believe, despite the fact that we asked for any communications, for any revisions, any changes, none of those were provided. There is a big black hole of lack of information here, because all evidence is that the report was delivered on April 1st. It was on time, as per Mr. Kenney. And then his leadership fell apart, and then it got forgotten about, whatever the case may be. But then all of a sudden, it's now being redone a year and a half later. LifeWorks / Morneau Chappelle fulfilled their contractual obligations to the provincial government when they delivered the report. Why would LifeWorks then turn around a year and a half later in February of 2023, or even if we want to say December of 2022, why would they then turn around and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, you guys total cheese go moldy, but you know what we'll do? We'll redo the report. In such a labor-intensive way, it's going to take us at least 7 months to do it when the original report only took 5. And we'll apparently do it for free. And there won't be any official communication or conversations on the record about what that process looks like. One could speculate that there was more work that was done than is being publicly made available. One could speculate that the final report was done and the people who received that report, whether or not it was Jason Kenney or Danielle Smith, didn't like what they saw. And so instead, they tasked LifeWorks either through new money or new communication, or God only knows because it won't show up in a FOIP, with all of these other changes. But it's absolutely stunning that the FOIP system in Alberta is so fundamentally broken and has been so fundamentally abused that when the public says, hey, we'd like to see the things that are rightfully ours to see, that isn't delivered. If it's entirely reasonable to provide the breakdown with this PowerPoint that has the timelines, it's entirely reasonable to provide any other PowerPoints that would have fallen within the confines of that request. We didn't get them. More and more, it's abundantly clear that the story that the government is trying to sell is either incredibly incomplete or it's just a lie. Because again, the people who the government of Alberta trusted to do this work on behalf of Albertans said that it was going to take them 5 months and that the report would be delivered in April of 2021. By Jason Kenney's own words, it was unscheduled to be delivered. But somehow LifeWorks had to finish their homework in February of 2022, and it took them 7 months to update a report that only took 5 months to write. Now, needless to say, we've taken a look at some of the names that were included in our FOIP request, because we were provided with the names of everybody who worked on the project, and we've submitted a couple more FOIPs to ask for specific correspondence from those folks between them and LifeWorks, including any updates. And we've also submitted another FOIP for any conversations that would have occurred or for any correspondence that occurred between the Premier's office and the Treasury office. Because at some point, there had to be some scheduling that was done to make those meetings, the final report, available to the Treasury Department, Treasury Board, and the Premier's office. So we'll wait to see what we get from the FOIP request, but now's a good time to mention, again, for the cheap seats, that we're only able to do those FOIP requests because of the support that we get from our Patreon sponsors. So if you like what we're doing, then you should sign up, www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. And that is the end of our content proper for the evening. And with that being said, we're going to open it up to the open mic. If there's anybody who wants to weigh in on the Twitter Spaces, and I've just resigned to just continuing to call it Twitter Spaces because that's what I want to do. So if there's anybody who wants to have any questions, any comments, any concerns with what the content was that we presented tonight, that's cool. If not, then I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of plugs. And if we don't have a call-in section tonight, we don't have a call-in section tonight. I understand that there's a lot to digest. But like I said, we're going to be making the contents of all of those FOIPs available publicly sometime tomorrow. We got to figure out the Dropbox thing again. It's been a while since we did this. So we're going to put all of it up there. And we're doing so with the utmost respect for privacy and with the full confidence that all of those poor people in the stock photos, that nobody will ever know who they were. And we got Tammy in, so I'll save the plug for a sec. And we'll bring Tammy in as a speaker. Tammy, what's going on tonight?
Oh. I listen to all of this stuff, especially the oil and gas, sorry, I'm having a word problem tonight.
Yep,
you know, my word
cool.
problems.
Yep.
The crap that they put in the water. I mean, they don't do it on purpose, but let's face it. I used to work for a big corporation. And the thing is that what we always knew was things go wrong, things break. But the fact that things were broken for so long, that they were leaking toxic crap into the water, and then I get into discussions, I won't call it an argument, about how the oil sands is a good thing. And the thing is a lot of these people use this really disingenuous thing to say that the oil sands is like producing gas and diesel that can be used in vehicles. Well, it can, technically, but it takes so much effort
Yes.
for them to turn it into a usable as fuel. They don't. They use it for other things.
Yeah.
One of the major things they use it for is synthetic oil in your vehicle. They use it for the pavement on a lot of roads. They use it for things that aren't oil and gas, like not in your vehicle, unless you count the synthetic oil, but it's not fuel. But there's so many people, like I literally got into a fight where I basically said, screw it, I can't even talk to you. And he showed up in a space with folks that, and I kind of knew after the fact, but I get really engaged, I get really angry. I knew he was basically baiting us. He found the space and he was coming in, and I wouldn't have been even surprised in the least if he wasn't one of the bunch that work for the government. But I just, and I get the issue where I can't talk and I can't type fast enough because he's literally, you can tell that he literally had all the things that he wanted to say pre-typed, and he was basically cutting and pasting them.
Well, that's not fair.
And I just wanted to smack him. It's just, and I get so angry about this stuff because, it's literally like these people don't care. Or they care about nothing but the money that's going to go in their pocket. And I'm like, isn't there things that matter more to you?
I mean, the way that I was thinking about this today and watching, I mean, we saw, I think it was last night, Marco Van Hugenbos. I'm so glad I still get to say his name. He put out a tweet calling out Smith. I mean, his numbers, there's been a lot of speculation as to the costs of the COP28 tour, but his numbers were certainly up for debate. But he was angry at Smith. And this is a guy who was part of Take Back Alberta, who was very clear that one of the major goals of Take Back Alberta was to see Danielle Smith get elected as premier, or elected as a UCP leader, and then again as premier. And the thing of it is, and this is what I find particularly fascinating, is when it comes to Danielle Smith, I've said it many times, her ability to absorb new information or information that's incongruent with her worldview is apparently quite limited, because despite the fact that she was calling out the Redford during the whole airplane thing, and she's on Hansard, the official record of the legislature, as by saying, this is an abuse of taxpayers' money and this is abuse of privilege and everything like that. She didn't seem to learn that the thing that pisses Albertans off is when you show them that you get to have a thing that they don't get to have. And it blows my mind that during an affordability crisis, heading into the holidays, no less, what is it with the UCP and travel? Because they shoot themselves in the foot around Christmas for reasons that I just can't wrap my head around. But heading into the holiday season, when the affordability piece is at the forefront of so many people's minds, she goes, I'm going to take 40 folks from the government to Dubai on an exceedingly expensive trip, and I'm going to take my husband on an official trip, which is, that's exactly the type of thing that pisses Albertans off. And she doesn't seem to have incorporated that. And what I find particularly telling is there's been no response. this has been a major trending topic on all kinds of social media platforms, the COP28 piece, for like we're at the better part of 4 days now, and we have not seen any kind of response from the government. We haven't seen anybody from Smith's office step up and say, us, it's the over-caffeinated leftists on Twitter. And of course, Danielle's paying for her husband out of her pocket. It would be preposterous if she didn't. We haven't seen any of those responses.
Yeah, I know. I'm same area. I watch for these things, and it's just nope. They don't say anything. And I don't know. I'm so worried, and then for me, it's not just the provincial government. When I start adding it to the federal government and PP, sorry, I have a hard time saying his name. It's a stroke thing, and I don't mind calling him PP, but
I think you've got a good excuse.
I've got a good excuse, exactly. I'm so afraid for anybody who isn't rich, who isn't going to be able to make it. If Polyev gets in, oh look, I could say his name.
There you go.
If Polyev gets in, and while Smith is in there, we are so in trouble.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what the reaction is from the base because, like I said, the fact that Marco is as angry as he is, that's really quite telling.
Yeah.
Because Marco's on the same town council basically as his mayor.
But here's my worry, right? How many years is it before another election? By the time we're in another election year, they will have forgotten. Albertans have a historically short memory span, unless you're an NDP. Then they'll hold you to something forever. And it might not even be something you did, and they'll still blame you. But if you're a conservative of whatever stripe, they forget. They forgive and forget almost instantaneously. So my thing is yes, right now they're angry as beep. But in 3 years, when it's election time again,
I wonder if she gets to 3 years though, because I remember this is sticking to. I mean, I'm going to paraphrase. I had a conversation with somebody who's very experienced in these matters. I'll say just last night, and one of the challenges with Danny is that she's made of Teflon. And nothing has stuck. But this one is resonating with the conservative base in a way that's kind of reminiscent, like I said, of the whole Aloha Gate thing. And I really wonder whether or not it's going to cause her problems.
Well, it might cause her problems, but we'll still have the problem of a conservative government that will be up until will be in place for another 3 years.
Yeah, we're stuck with that for a while.
Is there anybody in that bunch that can take over from Danny? Which, yes, I'll be quite happy if she gets booted by the rest of them. But honestly, is there someone in there in that group of crooks? I'll call a spade, in that bunch of crooks that will do any better.
I mean, I don't know if Rebecca Schultz, to me, the heir apparent would be Rebecca Schultz. And I don't know if Rebecca Schultz would be quite as, I mean, she's quite fond of her rhetoric, on the feds, but I think that when she's not having her statements written for her, she would be slightly more even keeled. But I don't know. I mean, you're not wrong. The options are not great.
And
The bench
I
strength's
mean,
pretty shallow.
isn't she the one that's now the environment, or the one that's basically helping to get the coal mining in place? Because
Allegedly.
somebody basically signaled to the Australians that they were still open for business if they wanted to try it again.
Yeah, there's been a lot of speculation on that, but there hasn't been, like, again, this is one of those areas where I think that the what do we actually know gets to be really important. And this is why that, to me, the FOIP that we received is so significant, because that clearly demonstrates that they lied to me, in my personal opinion, and not as a statement of fact, so nobody get all suey. But in my opinion, that establishes quite clearly that the UCP lied. They lied about the report. They lied about when it was available. They lied about what it was commissioned, when it was commissioned. And I think most importantly, I'm not convinced, speaking only for myself, I'm not convinced that there is compelling evidence that the final report that was delivered is reflective of the RFP. And that makes me wonder what other interim directions may or may not have been given.
Yeah. Oh, good gracious. Why can't we just get a... Why can't we just, you know what? I look at it and go, I would take a nice, calm Joe Clark kind of...
Oh, man, make politics boring again, right?
Yeah, I would totally take boring, even if it was conservative boring.
Yep.
I could take that at this point, because at least they weren't out to screw all Albertans, right?
Totally agree.
But these guys, they literally don't give a damn. We could all die, and they don't care. They literally do not care. Every one of us could just croak tomorrow. And aside from the fact that they wouldn't be getting taxes from us, they still wouldn't really care, because they're getting their money from big business.
I would bet, though, purely speculating here, I bet Danny would care. And I say I bet Danny would care because she needs her audience. Anything else you want to throw out there, Tammy?
No, you have a great night.
You as well.
We'll talk again next week, probably.
Absolutely. All right. We've got one of the more prolific Twitter accounts on the Alberta political scene. I have no idea what their name is. I don't think that they're the real Alberta UCP. I feel like there's some wordplay going on there, but what's going on tonight?
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Can you hear me okay?
All right.
Are we going to do the phone thing?
Can
you hear me now?
Yeah, I'm getting little like fractional second clips that I'm missing audio on. So, but if you can hear me fine, that's probably okay.
Yep.
I don't usually join these things to talk a lot, because one of the things I wanted to do with my account was just be kind of low key with personal stuff. But I think that something that I wanted to say when we talk about like the last speaker who was just on, Tammy, I think, was it you, Tammy?
Yeah, it was Tammy.
When we think about like what the people who are in power are doing to screw over every Albertans, like we think of exclusively the working class, right? You have a job, you have to work for that. We think about that. I think that we don't always think about who benefits from that from those times when we get screwed over. And I think it's in terms of really sort of figuring out and really like seeing what the overarching game plan is. I think that it's helpful to have that sort of like, if not on the back, like at least on the back burner, so you can bring it to the front of mind when you're thinking about that. I think that Danielle Smith is going to have this job until either she gets bored or until the people she really works for get tired of her. And the people she works for are literally just the richest people in the province. You look at her resume, you can go down through the list of who she worked for. Her last job was what? She was working for the Alberta Enterprise Group, right?
Yep. And
who are all them? You can look at that. It's a bunch of the richest people in the province. Who's not on there? The Shaw family. Who's she before that? Right? So you can go down the list and go through her resume, and you can see who she's worked for and how they're all connected. And those are all the people that are going to benefit from the stuff. Like, you look at the Dynalife thing. That went on all through that. And I don't know all the numbers. I have not been able to follow things as closely in the last couple of years as I did in the first couple of years when I started paying attention. But Dynalife is going to make a ton of money off of the way that they are, that the contract that they had is ended, right? That's the point of all this, is to transfer to the people that she's working for as much money as she can. And that's going to keep them happy, which means that she's going to get the job as long as she wants. I have a tinfoil hat theory, which I cannot prove, which is the reason why there's such a, like, it's not just that she went with a handful of folks to Dubai, it's that she went with 100 people. Because if there had been a delegation of like a dozen people to Dubai, it'd be like, what are you doing? It's a thing, but it wouldn't be the big stink that it is. My tinfoil hat theory is the reason why there's 100 people going is because they are treating it like a job fair.
Well, I think that another part of it is, when she says a delegation of 100 plus people, one of the things that's been identified is what you're talking about is there's 100 plus people from the province of Alberta who went to this thing. And when you're talking about that, then, how many of these people are actually coordinated with Smith and her government group? I mean, Dr. Joe, sorry, you're really loud in the background there, man. Dr. Joe Vipond is there.
Oh, sorry.
He would technically be part of the delegation from Alberta, but I feel pretty confident that he and Smith are not exchanging meeting notes.
Are environmental groups like that counted in the numbers that were cited that way?
Well, that's the problem, is we don't know what the source of those numbers are. Like, there's been a lot of speculation, but we don't know what the exact number is of people who attended COP28 from Alberta, and we don't know how that slip or how that split is worked. Because if you take a look at what's the delegation from Alberta by definition, that's all the people from Alberta. And is that, you think about the oil companies, you think about the oil and gas companies, you think about the CSIS companies. Yeah, they're probably traveling in the same or similar circles to Smith, but for Smith to say that she's leading a delegation of 100 Albertans, I strongly suspect, given Danny's comfort with words, she took a look at how many people were going to be attending COP28 from Alberta and said, well, Premier, I'm leading them.
And she counted Dr. Vipond.
Which I love.
That would actually be hilarious.
I know, right? That's what I'm hoping for.
But, like, but what I would come back to is for that are like someone like Daniel Smith, who are basically the up and the high profile conservative types. Their ambition to end their career is to land at one of the companies that they benefited from in some kind of high, some kind of prestigious titled role with limited actual physical work to do. So,
a good paycheck.
An example is Jason Kenney at ATCO.
Yeah.
Right. So what Danielle is looking to do at the end is basically find a parachute like that. That's my tinfoil hat theory. I can't support that. But that's just my observation about this is the pattern. But really when it comes down to folks who are talking about getting screwed over, whatever, it limits our effectiveness in terms of pushing back against that by forgetting who supports that party and the people that are in it, because that, when we talk about well, what if Danielle Smith has scandal that takes her down? It's not going to happen until the people that who have supported her so far decide so. When you see a story that is critical of Danielle Smith in a way persist from a place like Global News, which is owned by the Shaw family, who she used to work for, then they're tired of her. If you see criticism of her, that is one story now, and then that scandal is gone the next day or the next week, they're fine, right? So if anything sticks, it's going to be because the people who own those news media companies are tired of her and want her to go. That's and that's an indication of how they feel, how the owners of that are going to feel about her, because they're the ones who are kind of making that decision. She didn't come into this in a vacuum. She's working her resume for a very long time to make her rounds to all of these people, like Murray Edwards, like Daryl Katz, and all these other really, really rich people, to make sure that they knew that she would serve them unquestionably and with all of her loyalty. We got that arena that's coming that you and me are paying for in Calgary. There's no accident about that.
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't disagree with you there. The only thing I feel I'll highlight though is that I don't have any doubt that there's influence that's exerted inside of the bigger media companies, but I also think that there are individual reporters who do what they do in an amazing way at holding people to account. And I know that he's been not super visible lately, but I look at somebody like Safe Kaiser during the election, who is with Global, or he was during the election. I don't know if he still is, but he did an amazing job of holding Smith to task. I just got to acknowledge that, otherwise I'll feel like a jerk.
Yeah. This isn't. My comment is not against any individual reporters. There are some fantastic reporters even working within Post Media, and they're doing great stuff. Safe Kaiser's done some great stuff. And I think I don't remember when he went from CBC to Global or whatever. But yeah, no, he's another great reporter. And it isn't about the individual reporters here, because the editorial choices are the ones that are outside of their power. They write the paragraphs, but they don't make the titles, and they don't choose where those titles go and what page, figuratively. So if we're reading newspapers,
when Staples turns on her, that's when I'll be like, oh,
yeah, he's even, at least someone like Rick Bell, that there's a light on in there, even though he just, is constantly, giving back rubs to this group. But Staples is just hilarious.
Yeah. Anything else?
That's really that's the thing I wanted to sort of like highlight. That's pretty much it. And I think that like we're going to want to figure out how to organize in a way that's productive to change, and that's something that I don't know how to do, but figure that out one day.
There you go. I don't disagree with you, man. And it's nice to have at the very least a voice to put behind an account that I see very, very often on the Alberta Politics Twitter scene often.
Yeah, I've put more time in there than, anyway, we don't have to go there.
Yeah. All right, man. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, I'm going to bring in our, I suspect, last speaker, who might actually have a little bit of insight as to the level of chicanery that I'm going to ask him about the FOIP stuff because he's put himself in the spaces. But Christian, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Nate. How about yourself?
I'll be honest with you, man. I was looking through the FOIP for the last couple of days, and I was just like, this is so lame sauce. I'm so disappointed. I cast such a wide net. I was certain that I was going to get more than just the RFP and a PowerPoint deck, because like I go back to when we did the whole LaGrange mask scandals, and we got like reams of emails and almost exactly the same wording. And that's all we got. And then I saw the last slide that had the timeline that, to my knowledge, has never been made public before. And I was like, whoa, hold on a second here. So I've been kind of tripping on that. Got a little bit of a head cold and a slight runny nose. So for anyone who's watching the video side, it's just a little bit of runny nose. I don't have a Coke habit or anything before somebody starts that rumor. But how are you doing, sir?
Oh, no, not doing too bad here. Just listening away, and I had to to chime in and say, I've got some good news for you, and I've got some bad news for you.
Okay.
Which would you like first?
Surprise me.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you the bad news first. So the bad news first is that your FOIP has managed to point out what I spent my entire second trying to do, and that was to point out when the UCP says something, then they go and do something else or say something else. And it's that consistent and persistent manner of constantly butting heads with what they just said or did previously. The good news is your FOIP has showed the same thing.
There we go. I'm glad I got to the party eventually. Yeah, it's stunning to me, and this is where I'm going to ask you a couple questions, if you don't mind. But it's stunning to me that the FOIP system has become so hollowed out that, like, I know how we got responses 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and I know how the process worked 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and the level of obfuscation that's been going on lately is like, is this a joke? Like, is this a joke? It's really quite surprising to me. But here's the first question I want to ask you is, let me rephrase it a different way. Have you ever heard of a government contract where the service has been provided and then delivered, and then a year and a half later, the government's gone back and said, please, sir, we'd like some more?
Well, that's not exactly a common thing. I think one of the listeners here tonight pointed out how sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes things get delayed and they don't quite go as planned. It kind of sounds like our LRT here in Edmonton, but hey, it's running now.
There you go.
But to see that the report was done, and at this point in time, I have no way to be sure of this. So again, it's speculal rubbing here a little bit. My guess is they read the report, the initial one. They didn't like what they read, probably went back and said, can you sweeten this up a little bit towards our position and make it a little bit more palatable for us to be able to sell? And I think that's why we're seeing some of these just absolutely wild figures. And again, spending 4 years trying to point out what they say, what they do, and nothing ever matching up. It's kind of like, the big fish story, right? Like, how big was that fish really?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's what's surprising about it to me is that it so clearly makes the case that there's no transparency to be found in government here. And it has gotten to the place where, like, I would think, he said naively, of course, that if the government had said, hey, we're going to spend public money, taxpayers' money, to do this RFP and to get somebody to write a report that's going to potentially influence the future of the province of Alberta, and I would argue the nation of Canada, if they got the report and then said, oh, I don't like that, and then went back and said, hey, I need you to go back and redo this and make it, could you polish this turd up a little bit here, please? If they didn't do that, like if they correspond that effect, I would think that there would be extra billing. I would think that there would be estimates. I would think there'd be, like, no government contractor is going to say, we would love to do this work for free for you, and we would love to try to polish the turd to the parameters that you've now given us. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. I think there's certainly some conversations probably going on, behind the scenes, which, quite honestly is not something that's unfamiliar, where a chief of staff will give somebody a call and say, hey, this situation, how can we make this a little bit better? That kind of stuff goes on all the time. Probably no different with this.
Yeah, to me, it's just it's a lesson in the loss of accountability, because the whole point of the Freedom of Information Act program is to ensure that there is some accountability for people. And I mean, I'm certainly dedicated to keeping the folks that we have writing FOIPs, myself included, FOIPing away, because every once in a while you get this little bit of like, oh, that's the timeline. I bet they didn't mean to include that. But the fact that...
Yeah, sometimes you'll get those little nuggets.
Well, that's how we caught the mask thing with LaGrange, because we had a sense that there was some chicanery, and we got a whack of emails. And that's where it came out that, yeah, it looked very, very clearly that there had been direction to ensure that this company that was in LaGrange's constituency got a sweet, sweet piece of that government pie. But again, like what's so striking to me is the difference of there's not a single email included in that FOIP response. It's literally the RFP and that PowerPoint presentation. That's all the documentation that we got. It's wild to me.
Which is funny, because I seem to remember during my first term being part of the NDP government, and how we got accused of doing everything over the telephone.
Well, there's certainly been plenty of document. I think it was Charles Rusnell did an excellent series of stories where he talked about how the UCP had migrated to using off non-taxpayer funded or accessible platforms and apps like WhatsApp and Gram and all of that kind of, and to do all of the communication so that it wasn't FOIPable. And that to me is, again, like that was a big deal story, but at the same time, that's one of those things where it's, when you have a group of elected officials who are supposed to be there to serve the people, and they're deliberately going out of their way to not be held accountable for anything that they're doing, that's a pretty big warning flag.
I would agree. I mean, this is why there's, a perception out there that all politicians, doesn't matter what level of government, they're all crooked, they're all on the take, they all lie, insert whatever term you want to have there. And for the ones that really, are trying their best to work hard, to be honest with people. I always said to folks, I'll be honest with you. The one caveat is I can't always guarantee you would have liked what you heard. I'm not trying to start a fight. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I'll let you know what my position is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think about I'm going to ask you this other one before I let you go. What do you think about the whole Dubai thing? I mean, the husband, that's the big question. And I'll do this as a two-parter. So what do you think about the whole, if Daniel Smith's husband did fly to Dubai and get all of the accommodations on the taxpayer's dime, is that bad? And are you familiar of that happening in any other times? That you can talk about, obviously.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think. I remember my time during government. We tried our best to be, I guess, as cheap as possible, and so there was a bit of a directive, and I certainly, as sitting on as part of CSG National, I found myself down in the United States a few times, and I was said, fine if your spouse wants to accompany you, you're paying every single cent of what it would cost for that. But in terms of dragging my spouse along, that was kind of discouraged because we had to be respectful of those public dollars. Is this trip necessary? I mean, you're going to a climate conference to not talk about the climate and how you've got a moratorium on renewables and how you're going to move forward in an industry that I think the crowd there maybe is excited about. So you have to start wondering, what's really good value for money? I don't know. Maybe there's meters there, but I got a feeling they're a little bit few and far between.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, it's a vanity tour. Is at the end of the day, I would. That's how I would sum it up, because it strikes me as being very much, again, fundamentally disconnected from the reality of what most Albertans are experiencing right now. But
yeah, I mean, if you want to, boot off a minister or two, maybe to go to this thing and make a presence, felt for Alberta, then so be it. As I said, I was down at the Council of State Government, on behalf of Alberta a couple of times. It was myself and a government staffer, and that was it. And we did our best to try to talk to as many people as possible and talk about how great Alberta was and how many jobs are down in the U.S. because of business with Alberta. I think those kinds of things are reasonable, but I guess at the end of the day, I think the Premier needs to do a better job of reading the room and more than just on this file.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Anything else you want to throw out there, man?
No, that was it. Appreciate the chance to chime in.
Yeah, no, thank you, and I appreciate the perspective. I mean, you have a body of experience that I think the vast majority of people don't have exposure to. So I definitely appreciate the context and the color, if you will.
Well, I always try to tell people, rather than trying to have an argument with somebody coming from different political positions, look at the position that they're trying to support, and see where the things don't add up. And maybe that's I wasn't such a target in the legislature because they knew I was right, and it was better not to poke the bear.
Well, that's one of the benefits that comes of being right more often than not, I'm told.
Well, not that I was always right, but I don't think I was too far off most times when I was describing their errors.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much, sir, and I hope that you hop on again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, buddy.
All right. We're going to wrap it up there because we're coming up to the 2.5 hour mark, and that's a very, very long time. So now for the shameless plug part of the show. I already talked about it earlier, but one of the reasons why we're able to do the FOIP requests and occasionally get a little bit lucky, as we did tonight, the support that we get from our Patreon supporters. And so first of all, big thanks to everybody who signed up to be one of our Patreon supporters there. But if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, and if you want to see us continue to produce that kind of content, you can help us do that by signing up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for as little as $5 a month, not only do you get early access to all of our interview episodes, but you also get the warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from knowing that you're helping us piss some powerful people off, and that's a wonderful feeling, I'm told. The other thing that I will plug as well is that the Christmas season is a coming, and we do have our fashion line. I don't know. I'm taking myself very seriously at the moment. Where you can go to get a little bit of breakdown swag. We have the beanies. We have the hoodies. We also have the variety of t-shirts. We've got the Keep the Conversation Going shirts. We've got the There's a Lot to Unpack Your shirts. And of course, we also have the coffee cup, which is my personal favorite. You can get all of these at abpoly.ca through our friends at abpoly. They do all of the work so that we don't have to, and we really appreciate that from them. Big thank you to everybody who showed up for the Twitter Spaces tonight. Big thank you to everybody who was watching or listening to the live stream. If you're listening to the audio version of this after the fact, we'd love it if you left us a review. And if you're watching on the YouTube or the Facebook, smash that subscribe button and the like button. Leave a comment. We read them. Even the mean ones. Probably shouldn't. That's it for tonight. I just want to say, have a great week, everybody. We're going to be back next Sunday. We don't have an interview episode coming up this week, but we will be back next Sunday with another live show. And Danny will be hitting her full PR stride, allegedly, at the COP28. And we'll have all of the fallout from that and so much more, I'm sure. And we'll be back here unpacking all of that. But in the meantime, in the in-between time, take care of yourselves, each other, and as always, keep the conversation going.